All right, let's get ready to dig in, not literally, of course. Today we're going deep into the world of microbes and what they mean for growing cannabis.
You got it.
You might think, microbes, those tiny things.
Yeah.
But really, they're a bigger deal than most people think.
For sure. We get so focused on the cannabis plant itself, right? We forget about where it all starts.
Yeah.
The soil, it's bursting with life, a whole web of organisms all working together,
Yeah.
and they have a direct impact on your plants.
So we're talking about the soil food web, right? I've heard the term, but I'll be honest, it's always seemed a little, science-y.
Yeah.
Like, do I need a microscope to get it?
You don't need a microscope,
Yeah.
but think of it like a tiny ecosystem, just like a forest or a coral reef.
Okay.
The soil is full of all kinds of different organisms, bacteria, fungi, nematodes,
Yeah.
protozoa. They all have their roles, and they're all interacting in these really complex ways.
Okay, so it's like a whole tiny city down there. But how does that actually affect my cannabis plants?
Well, think of it like this. Some microbes are like the city's waste management team.
Huh?
They break down organic matter, like leaves that fall or compost. They turn it into nutrients that your plants can actually use.
Oh, wow.
Others are like architects, building up the soil structure so that there's better drainage and aeration.
Okay.
And then you got the protectors, like beneficial fungi, that help fight off diseases.
So it's a whole support system right there in the soil.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool. But I'm guessing some microbes are better than others for cannabis?
Exactly. There are certain types that are really great for your cannabis plants.
Okay.
Like, for example, rhizobacteria. They live close to the plant's roots, and they're like little chefs.
Oh.
They convert those complex nutrients into forms that your plants can actually absorb easily.
I've heard of those. They're the ones that get kind of eaten by the roots, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's a little freaky.
Yeah, it might sound weird, but it's this super cool process called rhizophagy.
Rhizophagy, okay.
The plant basically invites the bacteria in and absorbs them to get those nutrients. Oh, wow.
It's like a built-in fertilizer system.
That's awesome. It's like plants are way smarter than we give them credit for. What about fungi, though?
Yeah.
Aren't some of those bad?
You're right. Some fungi can cause diseases.
Yeah.
But then you have the beneficial fungi,
Okay.
like mycorrhizal fungi. They create this mutually beneficial relationship with plants.
Okay.
They extend the reach of those roots, helping them to get water and nutrients from a bigger area.
So they're like little explorers bringing back goodies for the plant. I love that.
Exactly. And in return, the plant gives the fungi sugars that it produces through photosynthesis. It's a perfect example of symbiosis in nature.
This is all super cool, but I gotta be honest, it's kind of a lot. Like, how can someone who just grows at home, how can they encourage all these good microbes in their cannabis garden?
Well, there are actually a lot of really simple things you can do.
Okay, good.
For example, composting. That's like providing a feast for your soil food web.
Okay.
It introduces all kinds of different microbes, and it gives them the organic matter they need to thrive. I've heard of compost tea, too. Is that like super compost?
You could say that. It's basically a way to multiply those beneficial microbes in your compost,
Okay.
and then you apply them directly to your plants.
Ah.
So you can water it into the soil, or you can even spray it on the leaves.
Oh, cool.
Like a probiotic boost for your plants.
I like that. So we're starting to see how important it is to take care of that soil and not just the plant.
Exactly. A healthy soil food web is essential for strong, resilient cannabis plants.
For sure. Speaking of healthy soil, there's this other cool technique I wanted to ask about, vermicomposting.
Okay.
It involves worms, right?
Yeah.
But I'm not sure exactly how it works.
Yeah, that's a whole other deep dive.
Yeah.
But basically, it's using worms to make this super nutrient-rich compost.
Okay.
It's like having this little army of composting machines right there in your garden.
I like it. But for now, let's stick with the microbes for a bit. I'm sure there are tons of things that people do in their gardens that might actually be hurting their soil food web.
Right.
Right?
You're absolutely right. There are some common practices that can really disrupt that delicate balance in the soil, and I think it's time we talk about those. You know, we've been kind of taught to think a pristine garden is like totally weed-free soil,
Yeah.
but that might not actually be what's best for everything going on underground.
I guess I'm guilty of that myself. I do like things neat and tidy, but maybe that's not the right approach when we're thinking about all those microbes. So what are some of the mistakes people make? What hurts their soil food web?
Well, tilling is a big one.
Okay.
You might think you're getting the soil ready, but you're actually messing up this whole network of fungal hyphae. You're moving all the good organisms around.
So it's like Bulldozing a city and expecting everyone to just pick up where they left off,
Yeah,
not a good plan.
exactly. It takes time for those relationships to rebuild after you till the soil.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
What about pesticides?
Right.
I mean, I know they're supposed to kill pests, but what about the good microbes?
Unfortunately, yeah, pesticides, especially the broad spectrum ones, they can wipe out the good guys along with the bad.
Oh, no.
Then your soil is weak, open to diseases and imbalance.
Right.
It's like using a sledgehammer to crack a nut. You might fix the problem, but you'll cause a lot of damage along the way.
So we need a more balanced approach.
Mhm.
What are some ways to keep pests away without hurting those microbes?
There are tons of great options out there.
Good.
One is to focus on preventing pests in the first place.
Okay.
You can use companion planting to naturally deter them.
Yeah.
For example, planting marigolds near your cannabis can help keep away nematodes and other pesky bugs.
Marigolds are like the garden superheroes.
Yeah.
But what happens if you do get pests? Are there any natural solutions that won't harm those good microbes?
Absolutely. There are biopesticides that actually use good organisms,
Oh?
like certain bacteria or fungi, to control the bad guys.
Huh.
It's like fighting fire with fire, using nature's defenses to keep things balanced.
Much better than harsh chemicals, for sure. Any other things growers should try to avoid?
Another thing to be careful with is synthetic fertilizers.
Okay.
They might give your plants a quick boost, but they can really damage the soil food web in the long run.
How come? I always thought fertilizer was good for plants.
Well, synthetic fertilizers often have lots of salts,
Okay.
and those can dehydrate those beneficial microbes. Plus, they don't provide the variety of nutrients a healthy soil needs to thrive.
So it's like giving your plants junk food instead of a good balanced meal.
Exactly. You're right. They might grow fast at first, but they won't be as healthy over time.
Right, right. So it's better to focus on building the soil the organic way with things like composting and cover cropping.
Exactly.
That makes sense. And using natural soil amendments.
Yeah.
This is making me rethink my whole approach to growing. It's like every little thing we do in the garden affects the soil food web in some way.
It really does. It's all connected. We're not just growing plants, we're cultivating an entire ecosystem. And the more we understand about that ecosystem, the better we can create a truly thriving garden.
Absolutely. I'm so glad we're having this conversation because I think a lot of growers like me, we focus on what's happening above ground and forget about all the action below the surface.
Yeah.
But going back to the microbes for a sec,
Yeah.
we talked about how some bacteria actually get absorbed by those plant roots.
Right.
Can you explain a little more about how that actually works?
Sure. So this process, rhizophagy, it's a really cool example of just how complex those relationships are between plants and microbes.
Yeah.
It all starts with the plant. It releases these chemicals that attract certain types of bacteria to the rhizosphere,
Okay.
which is the area around the roots.
So it's like the plant is inviting those bacteria to a party.
Exactly. They're lured in by those sugars and other compounds the plant releases. Then, once they're there, the plant makes these tiny pockets around them.
Wow.
It's like a little bacterial farm inside the root cells.
Like the plants are creating these little greenhouses.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. And then once the bacteria are inside those root cells, the plant breaks them down.
Wow.
And it absorbs those nutrients, especially nitrogen.
So clever. But isn't it risky for the plant to have all this bacteria hanging out inside its roots?
That's a good question. But plants are smarter than we think. They've evolved these really complex ways to control the whole process.
Okay.
They can tell the good bacteria from the bad ones and only let the good guys into their root cells.
It's like they have a tiny bouncer at the door, only letting the VIP microbes in.
Exactly. So how can we encourage this rhizophagy process in our cannabis gardens?
Right. Good question.
Well, the key is to have a healthy, diverse soil food web.
Makes sense.
When the soil's rich with organic matter and lots of different microbes,
Yeah.
the plants are more likely to engage in rhizophagy because they have a bigger selection of good bacteria to choose from.
This is all so fascinating. I'm really starting to see my garden as this whole ecosystem, not just a collection of plants.
It is. It's incredible, right? And the more we learn about that soil food web, the more we realize how much we don't know.
For sure. Well, before we move on, I want to circle back to those beneficial fungi we were talking about, the mycorrhizal fungi.
Okay.
There were different types, right? Are some better for cannabis than others?
You're right. There are different types.
Yeah.
And how they interact with cannabis is still being studied. But we know that arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi, or AMF, are super important for cannabis cultivation.
Why are they so special?
Well, they create these networks of hyphae that actually go into the root cells of cannabis plants.
Ah.
This creates a direct path for nutrient exchange.
Wow.
They're especially good at helping plants get phosphorus, which is really important for those flowers to develop.
So they're like the VIPs of the fungal world, giving your plants direct access to those essential nutrients.
Exactly. And how do we make sure we have enough AMF in our cannabis gardens?
Yeah, how do we encourage those?
One of the best things is to just avoid messing with the soil too much. Tilling can really damage those delicate hyphae networks.
Oh, okay.
So no-till gardening and mulching are great options.
It's all about giving those beneficial fungi a stable, welcoming place to grow.
Exactly. And there's even evidence suggesting that AMF can help protect cannabis plants from some diseases and stress.
Oh, wow.
So encouraging their growth has multiple benefits.
I'm really starting to understand how complex the soil food web is and how everything is connected. But it also feels kind of overwhelming. Like, how can we even keep track of all those different microbes
Right.
and make sure they're all doing okay?
You don't have to be a microbiologist to have a thriving soil food web.
That's good to hear.
The key is to focus on practices that promote good soil health overall,
Okay.
and the microbes will generally take care of themselves.
So it's like setting up a good environment and letting nature do its thing.
Exactly. If you give them the right conditions, you're setting the stage for this whole vibrant, diverse microbial community to flourish.
This whole conversation's been a real eye-opener. I'm seeing my cannabis garden in a totally new way. Like it's teeming with all this microscopic life.
Right.
And it's all affecting how my plants take up nutrients, how those terpenes develop.
It's amazing, isn't it? And honestly, the more we learn about the soil food web, the more we realize how much we still don't know.
That's what I love about gardening. It's always a learning process. You know, speaking of learning, we touched on vermicomposting earlier,
Yeah.
and you said it's a whole other deep dive.
It is. It's all about using worms to make this supercharged compost that's so good for your plants. It's like nature's own composting system.
Okay,
The worms do all the work.
very cool. But before we wrap up our microbe deep dive, I want to make sure our listeners have some practical tips
Yeah.
so they can start using all this info in their own gardens.
Yeah.
What are some concrete things we can do to make our cannabis gardens more microbe friendly?
So for those of us ready to get our hands dirty metaphorically,
Yeah.
of course, how do we actually use all this microbe knowledge in our gardens? Like, what are some specific things we can do to make our cannabis gardens microbe friendly?
Yeah, what are some action steps we can take?
Well, composting is a great place to start.
Okay.
It's like making a gourmet buffet for all those microbes in your soil.
Yeah, that makes sense.
You can compost kitchen scraps, yard waste, even shredded cardboard.
Oh, wow.
It all turns into this nutrient-rich compost, perfect for feeding those beneficial microbes.
I've been wanting to start composting forever,
Yeah.
but it always seems so complicated, all the different methods and stuff.
Don't overthink it.
Okay.
You can start simple. Just make a pile in your backyard.
Okay.
You layer brown materials like leaves and twigs with green materials like your food scraps.
Yeah.
Keep it moist, turn it every so often, and you're good to go. There are also tons of online resources and even composting workshops if you want to learn more about the different ways to do it.
Perfect. I need to put that on my to-do list.
Hmm.
What about compost tea? We talked about that a bit earlier. Do you recommend that for cannabis growers?
For sure, compost tea is a fantastic way to give your plants a direct shot of beneficial microbes. Plus, it's super easy to make.
Okay.
You just steep compost in water, aerate it so those microbes multiply,
Okay.
and then you can either pour it on the soil or spray it on the leaves.
Like a little microbe smoothie for your plants.
Exactly.
I like that.
So easy.
I'll have to try that out. We talked before about things to avoid, like tilling and pesticides. Is there anything else that can hurt that soil food web?
Overwatering is another big one.
Oh, okay.
Soggy soil creates these conditions where there's no oxygen, and that's really bad for those good microbes.
Yeah, they need to breathe, right?
Exactly. It's important to let the soil dry out a bit between waterings.
So it's not just about what we add to the soil.
Right.
It's how we care for it, too.
Exactly. Things like watering, making sure the soil drains well, and making sure it's aerated. That's all super important.
This whole conversation has been so eye-opening.
Yeah.
I'm seeing my garden as this living ecosystem, not just plants, but this balance between the plants, the soil, and all the microbes in it.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Oh.
And you know, the more we learn about these relationships, the better we get at creating thriving cannabis gardens that are productive, sustainable, and in tune with nature.
Speaking of sustainability, I'm really excited to learn more about vermicomposting in our next deep dive.
I am too.
It seems like a really awesome way to make that nutrient-rich compost, all thanks to worms.
Absolutely. It's a great way to cut down on household waste and create this closed loop system in your garden. We're going to go into all the details like setting up a worm bin and harvesting that black gold.
Can't wait. Until then, everyone listening, start thinking about your cannabis gardens from a microbial perspective. Learn about your soil food web, nourish those beneficial microbes, and your plants will thank you. Thanks for joining us on this amazing deep dive.
Thanks, everyone.